So Peter, I wanted to ask you a question. How many times have you been asked questions like you received from the Nagels? From HIV positive people desperate to get answers from mothers with babies. How many times do you think you've been asked?
Since then, how many times have been asked?
Or even before then?
Yeah, no, before. Well, I would say maybe 100 times, about 100 times, I would say, at least. Yeah. Probably more actually. I get sort of several emails a week asking about it.
Several a week?
Yeah. Wow. And my advice is relatively consistent. I'm not a doctor, but these drugs are DNA chain terminators designed to kill human cells. Maybe you could already draw your own conclusion. If not, look a little bit at some of those pictures that we just saw now.
Yes.
And scientists still consider, well, maybe you should lower the dose a tiny bit.
Yes. So are there any questions from the audience for the Nagels or Peter or even myself? Yes, please. Oh, do we have some microphones?
Lots of them.
I guess we can
share.
But you were really one of the first.
Just out of curiosity, you said 100 times. How many of these have heeded you? How many stopped the drugs altogether?
Well, I don't know that. I can't swear to that. These are all these things. But I get also a good number of letters who said, I owe you my life and thank you, you're my friend and all this.
They let you know that. That's
nice. Yes. Not all of them, but some of them really write back. It's very few hate letters, which I always expected and sometimes actually even miss when they don't come. Say, what's wrong with them? I mean, they must be all odd people. Why don't they hate a genuine mass murderer? I give them one and then they don't hate me.
Okay, a question for Martin Barnes.
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you respond?
No,
and also with Etienne de Harvin, they claim that they've never seen HIV with the electron microscope in the fresh blood of someone who is HIV positive and has a high viral load.
Well, that is totally consistent with what you were here this morning? Oh. Yes. Or you were sailing? I don't even sail. So I pointed out this morning, it is a consistent feature of these viruses claimed to cause slow diseases that they are always inactive or neutralized by antibody. So once you have antibody present, which is the AIDS test, that we have heard lots about, that's all it looks for, antibody against the virus. Antibody attached to a virus kills the virus immediately. I mean, it makes it impossible for the virus to enter the cell. It's very, very effective against, vaccines work very effectively against viruses, but not so much against bacteria. So it's very consistent with the AIDS test. It shows their antibody, and there was this genuinely original question. How come do they need treatments when they have antibodies? The antibodies work so well that our nation's leading AIDS researcher, Dr. Gallo, got a tiny bit in trouble for not finding the virus and having to steal it from France. And Robin Weiss, the professor from the UK, likewise. And he wrote a very sophisticated article in Nature, The Provenance of Viruses, which came all from France. So the antibodies work very well.
Okay,
and
how about during the stage of viremia, why couldn't they see the HIV virus then with the electron microscope?
There is no viremia ever. As Dr. Etienne de Harvin, where is he? The professor of our friend. Anyway, that's what he pointed out, and we're not 100% eye to eye on this, you noticed this morning, but on that part, he's 100% right. There is no viremia. The viremia we have only found in some inbred leukemic, or viremic mice and chicken. And they're all highly inbred. Outside laboratories or breeding institutions where you breed out resistance or you breed in endogenous or exogenous viruses, God knows what, it's never been observed.
Okay, let's move on. Does somebody have a question for the Nagels since they're here?
I do.
Yes.
Lindsey, I'm interested in when did you learn about your story, and what was it like? And then for the family in general, but for you first.
As I've known ever since I can remember, but I guess when I was in 5th grade is when I really found out what the disease was. But before that, I just knew I had an illness, that I was going to die because of the drugs that I was given.
You should know that when Peter Duesberg came into our lives and Lindsey's life was changed, we did a little drill with her. I said, "Who saved your life?" Peter Duesberg. She had that one down.
Can I get adopted too?
Yeah. Any day.
Thank you very much.
Question for you, Peter. Since so-called HIV antibody, antigen, and RNA tests have long since been debunked, how could someone know if they are carrying the passenger virus known as HIV?
Say that again. So what has been debunked, you said?
Since the so-called HIV antigen, antibody, antigen, and RNA tests have long since been debunked, how could someone know if they are carrying the passenger virus known as HIV?
Mm-hmm. Well, debunked, I would say the majority of those living on this planet have not debunked the antibody and the antigen tests of HIV. Isn't that right? Or we are really a minority. It's nice to be a minority sometimes. We are not. It's not generally considered to be debunked. So now you want to know how can it be? What was your question at the end?
How does someone know if they're carrying the passenger virus?
Well, that is typical for retroviruses. When they are neutralized, when there's antibody against them, they have hardly a chance to be outside the cell anymore. They are now latent in cells. The model for this is actually the lambda-phage from André Leboeuf of the 60s. It was a great breakthrough that viruses that can be, on one hand, pathogenic, can be, on the other hand, totally latent and inactive when they are indicated in the germline, and there's a repressor. And that was what retroviruses were thought to do with cancer. So here we could have the situation, you're infected, antibody neutralizes it, it doesn't come out anymore. But in a few cells, it will stay, provided it is not expressing itself. The DNA is silent. And now a latent virus, like a gene also, in a latent form, is a bit like a radioactive isotope. It has a low probability of failing the repression, and then it becomes active, here and then. And then it shows up. When you have antibodies, the antibody catch it, is no avail. But if you now take 5-15 milliliters of blood out of the patient and have millions of cells in a tissue culture dish, that's what these guys are looking at, the Gelderbloms and the Havens sometimes, in the microscope. Now you have them in tissue culture, there's no more immune system to catch them when occasionally this isotope pops and an active virus comes out. And then they add these umbilical blood cells, that Etienne described this morning. They are uninfected cells. They have never seen the virus before. They're infected. And now in the cell culture, there's no immune system. Now they have free range. They can replicate, and they replicate to their fullest. Those are the cell lines that Dr. Gallo patented on the same day as he said it was killing cells. Those cell lines are still growing now. And the companies make viruses that they need for antigens to find in turn the antibodies. He signed on the patent office that these cells are immortal. So they produce the virus now in vitro, and then you can look at the microscope and see him as that's a latent passenger virus. A virus that is not sufficient to cause a disease, and a virus that's not necessary to do it. And both of these apply to all AIDS conditions. You can have Kaposi with the virus or without, and the virus is not sufficient to do it. It's not necessary to be there.
Well, I was actually going to ask, as someone with who has never had detectable virus, would you consider me to be HIV positive, even though I'm testing positive on the antibody test? But I don't know if that's related to the movie, so I'm happy to pass on to another question. But I've never had detectable virus, so I'm very curious if you would consider that as positivity or not.
What is called, I didn't coin that word. What they call positive is have antibody against it, which is good news.
Could I ask that?
When you ever had a retrovirus infection, it's for lifetime. There will be some cells infected where it's latent.
Just a question for
Okay.
the family. I mean, you can't be very impressed with the pharmaceutical companies. So I'm just wondering what your feelings are about having the swine flu vaccine, for example.
Well, is my mic on?
Yeah.
We don't comply with that. We haven't actually complied with a lot of the childhood type vaccines for Lindsey since she was about 5. So we've never bought into that.
Right here next.
Okay, I just wanted to ask the Nagels, any three of you can respond. What's been the reaction of maybe your community and people who have seen the movie to you?
Our local community in Minneapolis hasn't seen the movie, but you know, several family members and Lindsey's boyfriend have driven to Chicago to see it when it premiered there. And it's been really overwhelming, and the audience reactions wherever we have gone is when at the end of the film, usually Brent or the producer David Seiner has been there, and they'll introduce, here are the Nagels, and people go, oh, I just can't believe it because Lindsey is alive, even though it states that in the movie. They don't quite get it. And at the filming in Chicago, the end of the movie was cut off. And so one of the ladies, when she saw the producer, she was almost giddy. She said, what happened to that little girl? And so he was able to say, well, here she is, ma'am. That was really impressive.
And one question, how many showings of the movie have you been to?
We've been to 7 different ones.
Wow.
Right there.
Hi. I just want to start off with a comment that as an HIV positive person, when you go into the doctor, if you tell the doctor, I believe HIV causes AIDS but is harmless, or I believe HIV doesn't exist at all, it's still the same mind game that they play with you. You still get treated the same way. And so I think this debate takes away energy from more important issues, and it just goes round and round, and it's really infuriating. Okay, and the second thing is, the question I have is, we spoke, Mr. Nagel, earlier about what happened when Lindsey had mono and a list, and I would like you to talk a little bit about that, because often when I ask people, what do I do if I want to have a kid, the answer is, well, just don't tell anybody. And sometimes it works for some people, sometimes it doesn't work for others. And I just express to me your fears if Lindsey has a baby. And I think those are important for women in the audience who may be thinking of having children, or men who may be fathers in the audience of HIV positive children.
Yeah, we discussed this a little bit last night.
Need another microphone.
This one's not working. This one work? There we go. Okay. Yeah, about 3 or 4 years ago, Lindsey had mono, or maybe had mono, but anyway, she was down and out, and it was, at that point, it was very scary for me to re-engage with the medical community because she wasn't of age yet. So we kind of went around about it, and I said, are you really sick? Because if you're sick, we're going to have to take you to the doctor, but there could be consequences, because at that time I was still fearful that she could be removed from our home, because it was threatened right when we took her off the drug that there were foster homes that would take her in for parents that would not adhere to their recommendations. So anyway, she went in and got some testing, and it was never really clear if she had mono or not, but then she got over it. But a couple of days later, the doctor did call back up, and he said, say, there's something else here that you didn't tell us about. And now this is a doctor we'd never seen before. So it's very true. If you, from my experience, most medical forms, your identification number is your Social Security number, and that will, once they punch that into a computer, once you've, like they said on the movie, once you've tested HIV positive, you're always going to be HIV positive. And they're not going to look at you the same. And it would be, I think, to have a child, if you test HIV positive, I think could bring on an onslaught of problems that you may not be able to conquer. The one reason that we got around that was that the media became very interested in our story just purely because of the oddity. I'm sure they thought we were killing our kid. But when they went to interview the doctors, that's when the doctors backed off. They didn't want any part of it after that. But before that, they were chasing us, and they were coming after. So it's definitely a threat.
Right here.
Okay, sort of a general question to the nice-looking family. But first, I want to thank you for being so brave to share your story. So, for the three of you having been to the dark side, if I may, and back, I'm curious, what sort of activism, if any, ideas you may have had, or any activism you participated in, that assisted you in your journey and what you're planning for the future. So maybe beyond the movie. So clearly, you probably thought of reaching out to the world in some way. So I'm curious if any activism.
Well, until Lindsey turned about 5, we were very active on the internet, and we were on a show that was like a predecessor to 2020. It was called Day One on Channel. You don't know what Channel 11 is? ABC. ABC. And so we were trying to do what we could to get the word out that, hey, these drugs aren't good for you. This was in 1994. And so when Lindsey started school, we moved to a smaller town in Minnesota, and we decided on Charlie Thomas's advice that we should just live our lives and try to be as normal as we can, not to make her school experience horrendous. So we did not tell the school authorities or nobody knew about us, supposedly. But we still did have some link with the internet stuff. But then just recently, when Brent came to interview us, it was a few years ago, we were the first party that he interviewed for his project, his movie. And we thought then, well, maybe if this movie actually gets produced, we'll take it up again. Well, now we are being more active, and my friend John Hankins, I hope he's here. There he is. He's an activist in Minneapolis who's the only dissident gay activist that I know of in the Twin Cities at the time. And he had us, he linked us together with Robert Scott Bell, and we've been on his radio show just 2 weeks ago. And we'd like to keep moving forward, and I'm hoping that Lindsey will take up this task and maybe give speeches at colleges or whatever she's asked to do.
Right there.
Yes, thank you. Why is it so difficult to find a vaccine against the virus that exists?
Okay, so we'll let Peter answer that question, and then I think we'll go to John Lawrence, and then we'll wrap it up because it's getting late. Okay, so answer that question.
Well, two answers. The only thing you detect with the antibody test is a vaccine, your own vaccine, just your vaccine that you have against polio, herpes, mumps, measles, antibodies against it. You have lots of them in your. Sorry? Well, you could. Who would want it? I don't know. Oh, you could give it to other people too. You could.
No. Why don't we find a vaccine
Yeah.
against a virus that exists for people to protect them?
Yes. Okay. Because those people who are antibody positive already have it. But what they really mean by a vaccine is an antibody or an injection or whatever it is that prevents AIDS. And that will never happen because the virus doesn't cause AIDS.
Yeah, well, I'm so happy to see Lindsey here, and I'd like to think I deserve some credit for it. I was interviewed by Brett Leung and spoke on AZT and poppers and other things, and apparently was cut from the film. But among the points I'd make, I think the two most important for AZT, which I've covered a lot. Number one, it's a random terminator of DNA synthesis. Therefore, it's incompatible with life. And secondly, it was approved on the basis of fraudulent research. This is well documented, and we should not be ashamed to say that. It's there. I have the documents. Lawyers have looked at them. It's fact. But at any rate, I am so happy to see you.